and YWCA, looking at understanding teen dating violence, what educators and youth workers need to know with Ray and Sojourner. I'm really excited. This is probably one of the webinars I've been most anticipating and looking forward to because I was able to work with Ray and their previous youth advocate earlier this year, and just really so excited about the topic, their expertise, their programming. So welcome, Ray and Sojourner. If you don't know about Kids Mental Health Pierce County, we are an agency of providers, organizations, and people here in Pierce County looking at supporting school-aged youth in Pierce County, accessing mental health, behavioral health resources, and overall wellness support. So I'm going to turn it over to Ray and Sojourner, and really excited to hear from you both today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vanessa. All right, let me just pull up my screen to share. All right, and we will go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us here today. There we go. There we go. My name is Ray. My pronouns are they, them. I am a youth advocate for the YWCA Pierce County. And today here with me is...
Hi, my name is Sojourner. I'm the Education and Prevention Manager, and I use she, her pronouns. So before we jump into teen dating violence, just want to give you a little bit of an overview of the other services that we provide at the YWCA Pierce County. I'll start off with shelter. So we do have a 22-unit apartment style shelter, and we do allow animals. I know that that's a rare treat with shelter services in the area. And typically an average stay is about 90 days, but we do offer shelter services for survivors of intimate partner violence in the community. That brings me into our housing program. We do have a program and a department specifically for long-term and safe and supportive housing for survivors. Sometimes those clients come from shelter, sometimes they come from other programs, sometimes they're connected through different departments here at the Y, but the intent is to have safe and supportive long-term housing. We also have a counseling department. Counseling can be for adults, children, families, individually and together. And we have several therapists on staff, as well as having several MSW students and counseling interns who provide counseling support as well. Then we have our legal department. We are specifically designed to support with family law. So we can do things like protection orders, DVPOs, parenting plans, revisions or modifications, things like that. We know that the longer you're with somebody and if there are kids involved, it can be very hard to not only navigate the legal system, but separate from the abusive partner as well. So our advocates also do in the community work where they accompany survivors to court dates to be a supportive person in the room, because we know that that can be really hard and potentially re-traumatizing. Community programs, that's where I live. So community programs, we offer a variety of services. It is often the first touch point for survivors who are connecting to the agency for the first time. We do one-on-one advocacy, resources and referrals, safety planning. We also provide support groups on Monday and Wednesday evenings. And we do a lot of general community support as well. Next up, we got children's program. It is what it sounds like. It is designed specifically to support the kiddos with secondary impacts of intimate partner violence. What that kind of means is the secondary impacts is maybe the violence isn't directed towards them, but it is occurring in the house and they are seeing, hearing, feeling it. And so in our groups, we have several different age ranges. We have 4 months to 5. We also have 6 to 12, and then we have a teen group for 13 plus, and they're all age appropriate. And we discuss a lot of social emotional learning to help kind of deal with some of the impacts and big feelings that we might have after that experience.
Oh, I missed one. There should also be one on there that talks about prevention, which is what we are doing today, right? So education and prevention is also a huge part and a growing part of what the YWCA does. And part of the reason that you're seeing this webinar today is to get the word out there and talk about what does dating violence look like? What does it look like for teens in an attempt to hopefully interrupt those cycles of violence before they even start happening. So if we can start having conversations younger younger, we can prevent some of that violence. And yeah, hope for a future without violence. So as we move into this workshop, just a couple of workshop agreements and notes. First and foremost, this is recorded. So if partway through you decide that you need to go do something else, that's totally fine. We encourage you to just come back and watch the rest of it and engage with the information. And then we do have the chat function enabled, or at least it should be, and we have the Q&A function. So if at any point you have a question that comes up, feel free to put that in the Q&A and we will address it at the end. If it's a more, I don't know, urgent question, you can put it in the chat and hopefully we will see that and be able to respond to it as well. And just to get the chat started, I would love to invite folks while I go over some of these agreements to just go ahead and put in the chat your name, the agency you work for, and the pronouns that you use. So start filling those in and I'll go over some of our workshop agreements. So first and foremost, when talking about intimate partner violence or domestic violence, one of the things that we invite folks to do right off the bat is to challenge your own assumptions. A lot of folks who don't have lived experience with DV or intimate partner violence will say things like, well, I would have done this, or I would have just left, or I would have hit them back. I never would have let things get that bad, right? So a lot of the I would have type of talk, we invite you to challenge those assumptions and challenge what you think you would have done, because we can't assume what any person would or would not do and would or would not put up with, especially when they're in a relationship with a person who they believe cares about them. So first and foremost, challenge those assumptions. Second off is take care of yourself. Obviously do whatever you need to do. It's being recorded, so you can always come back to it later. And then a shift in language. A lot of times when people talk about intimate partner violence and domestic violence, you'll hear people using terms like victim and abuser, right? Victim and perpetrator, those legal terminologies. But we really want to shift that focus away from the idea of it is only abuse when it's illegal, because it's not. There are things that are perfectly legal that people do that are still extremely harmful. So shifting the focus from the legality into the fact that it causes harm by using the word abuser. And then with victim, we want to shift that into talking about survivors. So focusing, instead of on the experience or the thing that happened to them, focusing on the person, their own healing, and reclaiming their agency. So you will hear us using those words, and I think it's just an important thing to point out and really focus on. So with that, we are going to jump in and get started with a quick grounding activity. Okay. So why should we talk about or think about teen dating violence? Why is this important? I know it certainly wasn't something that was talked about when I was a teenager, so why do we need to do it now? And speaking of when I was a teenager, this is our grounding activity. Imagine your teen self. And for some of us, that might be an uncomfortable thing to do. But imagine your teen self. What is something that you wish you had known about relationships and about dating? What is something that you had to learn the hard way about relationships or about dating? Feel free to put something in the chat if there's something that resonates with you, but that's really just something I invite you guys to be thinking about is, what did I not have and what can I hopefully bring to the table when I'm working with young people? And that is really the core of the why that we want people to start talking about and thinking about it. Vanessa, I see in the chat, you just put normalize these conversations. Absolutely, right? Being able to talk about it, not having it be something where, oh, well, I don't want to talk to adults about who I'm dating because it's just awkward. We want young people to look up to their trusted mentors and about this type of information, right? And trust us with it. And then why do we need to be talking about it? This is our grounding statistic. So 1 in blank number of teens will experience teen dating violence before they turn 18. I'll give a minute or two if folks want to throw in the chat. What do you think that other number is? 1 in blank number of teens will experience teen dating violence before turning 18. Seen a couple couple people have guessed 4. I have a guess for 6, 5, 1 in 6. You guys are doing better than some of the teens. Some of the teens that I work with, they're like 1 in 100. I'm like, no, unfortunately, it's a lot more common than that. So our grounding statistic here is that it's 1 in 3. 1 in 3 teens will experience teen dating violence before turning 18. And that is across gender. That is an average of both male, female, and gender diverse youth. So it's a very, it's a very common experience, and yet we don't hear about it. We don't hear it getting talked about. We don't hear people trying to solve it. And so it's really important for folks who work with young people, because again, going back to our grounding activity, if you put yourself back into your teen years, what are the things we remember most? What are the things that were dominating our brain space during that time? It's the relationships we had, whether they were friendships or dating relationships. Those teen years are huge. And if we don't have people guiding us through them, it can lead to patterns of really unhealthy behavior and lead to folks putting up with things that they don't know are abuse. And with that, we're going to get into our definition.
So when we talk about teen dating violence, we operate off of this unified definition about what we're talking about specifically. So when we say teen dating violence, what we mean is when a partner uses physical, emotional, or sexual abuse to gain and maintain power and control over the person they are dating. It's very important to know that this is not just an argument once in a while, it's a pattern of unhealthy behavior. And we'll talk a little bit more about this as we get into the patterns in the cycle of abuse. But it is something that reoccurs and happens over time, and it is a pattern of escalating behavior as well. It may start with something small, may start with a little comment or a jab, and it may escalate into now you're getting comments and jabs 2-3 times a day, or there become consequences to, you know, things that you're doing in your relationship that should be unmonitored or unrestricted. And so when we are referencing teen dating violence, we're talking about patterns of behavior specifically.
Mm-hmm. This is something we really reiterate with teens, because we often hear oh, well, it doesn't happen that often, or it only happened once or twice. When the reality is that we need to be looking for that pattern. And realistically, once is enough, especially when you're a teenager. If it's something that you notice and it makes you uncomfortable or makes you feel unsafe, inviting students to recognize those feelings and to say, actually, I'm not okay with that. And what do you do with that when you're not okay with something in a relationship, which that's called boundary setting. We'll talk more about that later. So there's a lot of misinformation, I guess, about what is and isn't domestic violence, what is and isn't dating violence, what counts as abuse, and what is maybe just someone being a little bit toxic. And it's really interesting to hear young people throw around these different terms. If you spend any time on TikTok or Instagram, you know, people are quick to say like, oh, well, so-and-so's toxic. But what does that really mean? And what does that mean to a young person? And how does it change the ways they relate to each other? So we break up some myths about what dating violence is and isn't. And the first one, so one of the things that we play a game with the students called Agree or Disagree, and we use the following statements that lead to some really fun conversations. One of the common beliefs out there is that only girls and women can be survivors of IPV being intimate partner violence. And the flip side of that coin, that only boys or men are the abusers. And we point this out and call it out because it's one of the reasons that for the longest time, intimate partner violence was known as a quote unquote women's issue nationally. It was something that supposedly only happened to women. So we really like to point out that it absolutely does happen to men, young men, boys, and it can have just as intensive impacts on them. And it gets swept under the rug in very different ways. So we talk about those. We talk about the way that gender stereotypes play into all of these different things.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it's hard to know also because there is still a lot of social stigma around men and boys being survivors. And so
Yes.
it can be hard to kind of pinpoint an exact statistic or to know the full scope of how that's happening in our communities.
Yep. Another common misconception that we hear from students, oh, my partner jokes around a lot and playfully hits me. It's not that bad, so that means it's not abuse. And we like to dispel the myth and just kind of ask the question, how do we know when things are a joke and how do we know when it's not? How do we know when a joke has gone too far? So it's really a good conversation starter to start thinking about intent versus impact, and specifically intent versus impact in relationships. If I think I was joking around and I give my partner a little shove, but that gets interpreted and has a negative impact, what's my responsibility in that situation? Again, it's just getting students thinking about the different ways that their actions in a relationship can have positive and negative impacts. And then finally, jealousy. Jealousy comes up in every single one of our presentations and workshops with students because it is such a nuanced and multifaceted thing, right? If my partner is jealous, that means that they care about me. I want my partner to be possessive. We hear these things all the time. And so really kind of trying to pin down what each student feels about jealousy. Does it feel good? Does it feel bad? Is it is it something that we should act on, or is it something that, we need to process? And so what we leave students with for this is basically the fact that jealousy, like any emotion, is a perfectly valid emotion. It's what we do with that emotion that matters the most. And as we jump into some of our warning signs, you'll see that that jealousy is often a root cause of a lot of these different types of emotions, right? So we're going to do our own agree disagree from the practitioner lens, right? So those of you watching are probably either folks who work with young people, parents of young people, whatever that might be. And so we're going to dispel our own myths that we have heard from other people who work with young people. All right, Sojourner, do you want to do our first one and explain the game?
Absolutely. So I'm not sure because we can't see everybody. If you agree, I know that you can give a thumbs up. If you disagree, you can put it in the chat or give us an angry face. I don't know if reactions show up. And it's also okay to be somewhere in the middle. I apologize, my finger looks wild. Let me use this hand. So if you're somewhere in the middle, that's okay. Maybe you can give us a different type of reaction than an angry face or a thumbs up.
You can also feel free to just write it in the chat if that works easiest for you.
Yeah, yes, please. And we'll go ahead and read those out when you put them in. But we're going to read a series of statements, and then we want to ask you for your feedback, agree, disagree, somewhere in the middle. And so the first statement is, if y'all are ready, I was going to do a drum roll, but I won't do that. Dating violence as a teen doesn't have the same consequences as violence in adult relationships. Agree, disagree, somewhere in the middle. Dating violence as a teen doesn't have the same consequences as violence in adult relationships. I see some shocked faces.
I like the shocked face emoji. That's so fun.
Different consequences, absolutely, Tessa. Thumbs down. Awesome. Well, thank you for giving us your responses to that. So when we talk about the consequences in the relationship, I think you kind of hit it on the head. There are different consequences, but this is actually false. So it is just as dangerous, just as deadly, just as harmful, just as impactful as violence in adult relationships. And it often is downplayed by the adults that are in children's lives because we have this sense of it can't be that serious. It's young love, it's a young relationship. But this can definitely lead to substance abuse, PTSD. It can have side effects of depression, anxiety, suicidality. There's a lot of different impacts. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about it later, but recognizing these things as being important. If it's important to the teen and they're highlighting it in their relationship or the young adult, then we have to take it seriously. And it can be just as violent, just as dangerous as adult relationships.
Yes, thank you. All right. Our next agree, disagree statement. Here we go. Teens don't seek help from adults when they're experiencing dating violence. Agree, disagree, somewhere in the middle. Teens don't seek help from adults when they're experiencing dating violence.
Okay, I see some in the middle, some thumbs up, some thumbs down.
Maureen coming in with the thinking face emoji.
Yeah.
Somewhere in the middle. Yeah, so a lot of you, I think, are kind of hitting on the fact that it really depends on the type of space that that adult is creating with that young person. If they're able to create a trusting and safe environment, then yeah, maybe that student is going to open up about those things. But what we've seen statistically is that unfortunately, less than 10% of teens seek help when they're in abusive relationships. Now, I will say that statistic is from a few years ago. So hopefully, fingers crossed, with the more that we talk about mental health and the more we normalize talking about feelings and emotions and all of those other things, right? My hope is that that percentage is increasing, that more teens feel safe enough going to or have access to at least one safe adult who they feel they can share those things with. But it just shows us that, again, it's something that we have to normalize talking about if we expect students to feel safe to come to us about these things. All right, and then our final one.
Most teen dating violence is yelling or physical outbursts. True, false, agree, disagree, somewhere in the middle. Teens do not, oh, just kidding, reading the wrong one. Most teen dating violence is yelling and physical outbursts.
What do we think on this one? I see a shocked face, which I'm assuming means disagree.
Agree. Okay. So we would consider, yeah, oh, the barf emoji, yeah, that's real. So we would consider this to be false. It can be, and sometimes it does, and those are the more visible pieces of just abuse in general and also young relationships. But it's also more nuanced. And I don't think we can talk about prevention and these types of conversations with youth without including technology. And technology is definitely a power and control tactic that is used in isolation. And the use of technology and coercion, blackmail, those types of things, a lot of it can happen online. And there's a lot of sort of crowdsourcing that becomes involved in that as well, where it's visible to a large online community. And it also can look like gaslighting, guilt tripping. You didn't do this, you're not a good friend, you're not a good partner. Do this for me, and there will be positive things that happen in our relationship. Don't do this, and there's consequences if not. And it can be something as small as pinching, or giving somebody the look. Often when we talk to adult survivors too, when they talk about their abusive partners, they often say it's a look. I know the look and I know what it means. And it can be as subtle as that. So sometimes it can be hard to recognize. And that's why we're going to talk about sort of the types of abuse and some warning signs.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys for playing along. Again, the activity just meant to kind of disrupt some of the things that we think we might know about dating violence and how it impacts teens. So we're going to jump into kind of defining what is abuse, what is relationship abuse. And this portion, I will say, is applicable to all ages. Obviously, we are specifically thinking about and talking about teens, but these warning signs and these types of abuse can happen in all kinds of relationships. at any age. So we'll kind of go around our circle here. There are 5 commonly recognized types of abuse. Starting at our top in the middle there, physical abuse. It's the one that gets talked about the most because it's usually the most noticeable, right? So this is the kicking, hitting, slapping, spitting, any of that physical type of abuse, where the other person is actually putting hands on, or physically impacting the other person in some way. Moving to the left, we have sexual abuse, which can be physical, but it gets its own category because it is a specific type of physical abuse, and it is not necessarily only physical, right? We know that there's also sexual harassment, sexual coercion, a lot of different things. And that's not true just of adults. It absolutely happens to teens as well. You can think of, a teen saying, well, everyone else our age is doing it, so if you really love me, then you would have sex with me. Or I really want to have my first time be with someone that I care about. And yeah, that can be a truthful statement, but it also could be a way of coercing someone into having sex when they weren't ready for it. So there's a lot of these subtle phrases that we talk about with students to be listening for. And then our furthest left, we have financial abuse. Financial abuse, not as applicable when you're a teenager, but very, very important as you are a young person getting established in the world. So we invite students to think about whose name is on what, right? Whose name is on the car lease, whose name is on the apartment lease, whose name is on the actual bank account. All right, if we talk about other types of abuse, including family abuse, I have seen and heard of families who will abuse the fact that they are a parent and tap into their child's earnings from a bank account that has their name on it as well. So financial abuse just being something that we invite students to kind of keep in their mind as they establish their footing in the world. I will say financial abuse is also one of the things that more often than not lands people coming to seek our services here at the YWCA. That financial abuse of having control of the money, controlling whether or not a person can work, controlling where that person can live, and making it unsafe if they can't live there. Those are the ways that it becomes kind of the most extreme and becomes a safety issue. All right, and then we have, oh, go ahead.
Can I just add in one note? I neglected to say this at the beginning. I apologize, but that's a good circle back, Ray. So thank you.
Yeah.
Is that in our service overview, all of our services are free and gender inclusive. We fully acknowledge the financial piece of that and the power and control involved in financial abuse, and we don't want finances to be a barrier to somebody seeking help.
Yeah. Awesome. Then we have emotional and verbal abuse, and these are the different types of manipulation, right, that get used. So calling names, putting someone down, gaslighting, all of these different techniques fall under that category. And then digital abuse, which again is kind of a newer thing. It's definitely not something that I dealt with a whole lot as a young person. I was still using MySpace as a teenager, and I will say even then there were things that happened on MySpace that bled over into the real world and had very real consequences. So it's important to talk about digital abuse, but also looking at the ways that digital things, social media, cell phones, all of those things are used for stalking, right? Stalking and harassment. That's a huge aspect of the digital side of things as well. And we're going to jump into some warning signs of an unhealthy relationship, thinking specifically about what teenagers are living and experiencing. These are the things that we hear are the most common warning signs of an unhealthy relationship. We've got looking through your phone, demanding your passwords, constantly checking up on you with excessive calls or texts, extreme jealousy or insecurity, possessiveness, controlling what you do or wear, isolating you from your friends or family, pressuring you to compromise your values, shaming you on social media, put downs or insults, breaking or throwing your things, threatening you, having an explosive temper, physically hurting you, or forcing you to do sexual acts that you're uncomfortable with. So a lot of the things on that right-hand side, especially down towards the bottom, right? The breaking, throwing your things, explosive temper, physically hurting you. Those are the things that are, we expect to see on a CW show. And as we're eating popcorn and we see that person's cell phone get thrown against the wall, we're going, ooh, you better leave them. They're unhealthy, right? It's the stuff that we've been trained to recognize as unhealthy. But for all intents and purposes, a lot of the other stuff on this list gets normalized in relationships, and it gets normalized for a lot of different reasons. It gets normalized through what we see growing up via our parents or grandparents. It gets normalized through what we see from other peers and students doing. It gets normalized in, like I said, the media that we're watching. We glorify some of these very dramatic relationships, and so it can seem like that drama is what's normal and is what you should want, that you should want a person who's going to be jealous and do crazy things for you. And it gets normalized through social media. I can't tell you the number of times that I have seen on Instagram or TikTok a person who starts a video with, I'm a relationship expert. And I just want to, it makes me so sad every single time. And I remind students all the time, the only person who is an expert on a relationship is the person who's in that relationship, right? So we can sure take advice from people, and they might have very good advice, but realistically, a lot of the advice that you're going to see on social media is not going to be good advice. I remember seeing a TikTok once that said, ladies, if your man isn't letting you look through his phone every day, then he's already cheating on you. And I was like, whoa. Right? So students are getting these messages that, oh, well, he's probably going to cheat or she's probably going to cheat if I don't already look through their phone. So I should set up a system to be looking through their phone regularly. And if they don't want to let me look through their phone, then that means they're being suspicious. And if they're suspicious, that means they're probably cheating on me and I can't trust them. And if I can't trust them, then I'm going to blah, 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 blah. Right? Going back to what I said earlier, that jealousy and that untrustworthy kind of paranoia is often a root cause for some of these behaviors that the students begin, copying from what they see. And you might think, oh, it's probably not that common. It is. All the time, every single classroom that we go into, students are shocked when we say that looking through your phone is an unhealthy relationship behavior. They will say, well, what if I already talked to them about it? What if I got their consent? What if they let me look through it? And we have to remind them that looking through a person's phone or demanding their passwords is not and cannot be a replacement for trust.
Mm.
Right? Constantly checking up on someone, having their location, getting mad when they don't text you back immediately is not a replacement for trust. Right? And so understanding that trust is a genuine choice, right? It is not something that you can replace, but it is a choice based on that person's actions. And that's hard to hear and it's hard to learn, right? It's not something that you can teach as easy as 1 + 1 = 2. But understanding that jealousy and understanding what trust is supposed to feel like can be really difficult. So Jordan, do you have any you want to touch on?
No, I think you kind of touched on all the bigger ones that we have seen most frequently.
Yeah.
But I do want to open it up to the group. Please feel free to put this in the chat. Just taking a look at this list, we know that it's not the biggest inclusive, every single warning sign listed that could possibly exist. So I'd love to hear from you if you all have perspective on, is there anything missing? Is there anything that you see in your work with youth, or even in your own, life, if you have teens, in your family and whatnot? Like, are there things that you're seeing there too, that we might also think about in terms of warning signs?
Yeah, or any that you find surprising. I know oftentimes when we do this presentation with parents, they're really surprised to find out how universal it is for teens to share their location on their cell phone. A lot of parents are like, oh, my teen wouldn't do that. But they are, I almost guarantee you, if your teen is in a relationship with someone, they are probably sharing their location on an app like Life 360. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but how can we normalize having conversations about that? Because that location tracking can also be really scary when a person wants to break up with, right? It's when it becomes the most dangerous is when a person is trying to exit a relationship. Oh, you guys are putting some great ones in there. Taking or hiding your phone. Yes, that access to the outside world. That has, you know, a lot of control written all over it. The isolation that you have when someone takes your phone. How are you supposed to call someone for help? How are you supposed to know what's going on? Yeah. The threatening to post nude pictures or really any kind of information. We see this all the time, and we remind students it's not just romantic relationships where these things happen, it's also friendships. And I think it's become a really normalized thing in the social media culture right now to just air out your grievances on social media, right? That, oh, I'm gonna put all of my screenshotted text messages with this person onto my Instagram to show that I was in the right and they were in the wrong. And something that Shamaya, who previously did this job with me, she always said that consent lasts beyond the relationship. A lot of folks think that once the relationship is over, then that means, well, okay, I can air everything out. But if they told you that in confidence, if they sent you a picture in confidence, just because the relationship ended doesn't mean that you have permission to post anything. I'm loving what you guys are putting. Commenting on their body or sexualized comments in front of others, saying that it's about admiration or attraction. Absolutely.
And we talk about this with youth too, in the sense of being an active and supportive bystander. And so we go through like some scenarios based on the power and control wheel, and something that we talk about very specifically is like the commentary or verbal things that are happening in a relationship where someone's receiving harm and there are others around. You can position yourself to stand next to that person if you don't feel comfortable saying something. But the assumed implication of staying silent is that you agree with what was said and what was hurtful. And that can be really important too, just to say, hey, like that wasn't cool, or no, I don't agree. And that's the end of that. But you made it known, you know, that that was not something that was acceptable in that space. And I see too in the chat, a lot of youth who mimic the violence in their homes. So that there are abusive in all relationships within the outside. Within and outside the family. Yeah. And I also think it's important to know that just because someone has secondary impacts or experienced violence in the home as a child does not necessarily mean that they grow up to be abusers. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're interpreting that behavior, but what fires together wires together. So they are seeing someone in the home get their needs met using violence, and it would only be logical for them to go into other relationships and say, I know how to get my needs met consistently using this strategy. But young people their brains are so elastic. And if they can learn that that is a way to get needs met, then they can learn that there are other ways to get needs met, and it might actually be better for them and more beneficial in the needs that they're trying to fulfill, to have those conversations in the relationship.
Yeah. And that brings up a really helpful point, and I will point it out when we get to our resources page as well. But one of the resources that we utilize and work through with students is actually a couple of quizzes. It's a personal quiz. It's just for reflection, right? But it's an opportunity for them to self-reflect. The first quiz is, am I in an unhealthy relationship? So thinking about a specific partner or friend, and then you ask a series of questions. And if you answer yes to more than 2 of those, then chances are you might need to have some important conversations, or look at getting an outside perspective on whether or not that relationship is healthy or unhealthy. And then the second quiz is absolutely key, especially to your point, Sojourner, that, you know, young people's brains are super elastic. And so at any point, they can unlearn these unhealthy behaviors that they have picked up along the way. So that second quiz is, am I using unhealthy behaviors in my relationships? So thinking about a specific relationship or friend and how do I treat them? and going down that same list and answering those questions. And if you find yourself answering yes to a few of those, it can be a really enlightening, but hopefully empowering. The way you try to teach it is very empowering of, oh, these are the things I need to work on. Not labeling a student as an abuser, but saying, you've maybe been using unhealthy behaviors. How can we choose healthy ones instead? Which is a great segue into our healthy relationships. But before we get there, we're going to show you guys our teen power and control wheel. We will be sending this out we'll give it to Vanessa and she can send it out to folks who were on this. But it is realistically, if you just Google teen power and control wheel, you're going to get the same tool. But it's a really helpful tool to be able to look at what are the common ways that folks maintain power and control in relationships. There are versions of this for adults. There are versions of this specifically for LGBTQ people, just kind of commenting on the different nuances. And so this one that we have specifically for teens talks about threats and intimidation, violations of privacy, limiting independence, isolation, emotional abuse, extreme emotions, use of social status, and minimize, deny, blame. And I think most of those are pretty self-explanatory about what they are. We all know what threats and intimidation look like, both emotionally and physically. Violations of privacy, those can be via tech and other ways. And then the limiting independence has to do with a person's access to their things or what they do. So the clothes they wear, the type of music they listen to even, those are all things that a person can try to control. And then isolation has to do with the access you have to people. Isolation is one that, again, if it goes far, we often have people who end up as, you know, some of our clients will say, I had no one else to go to, right? I had alienated my friends, I had alienated my family, all because I thought that this one person had my best interests in mind, only to find out later that they didn't. So that isolation piece is definitely a huge one.
Emotional abuse is also something, emotional abuse and extreme emotions are similar. It's a similar tactic, but it uses different types of information about a person. So emotional abuse involves using your emotions to control, or no, I'm sorry, to use their emotions to control the situation. And then extreme emotions is me using my emotions to control a situation. So an emotional abuse might look like sharing personal information about me with other people to humiliate or embarrass me. And extreme emotions might look like something that's actually really common with young people is I'm going to harm myself if this thing doesn't happen, if you don't text me back, and then I'm using my emotions in that scenario to say, you know, I'm going to control this situation and this is what I want with these emotions I'm expressing. Social status also involves like who has more social power, who has more access, who's older, who has the ability to do more things. And then, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I just said money.
Money, yes. Yes, who is more financially well off? It can involve socioeconomic status. It can involve race. It can involve a lot of different facets of things because there is, and I don't know if y'all are familiar with the power flower, but the way that we show up in community and the ways that our identities are present and how we present in the world is tied closely to our social status and what we can access and achieve. And if we're on very different levels of something, that changes the dynamic of the relationship.
Yep.
And minimize, deny, blame. You may all have heard this as gaslighting. Is anybody familiar with the phrase gaslighting? I'm sure there's got to be somebody.
It's become kind of a hot button or a buzzword. That's the word. Where it's become a buzzword, and a lot of students know it, but they know it in a different context. Students are familiar with kind of the like the what is it, girl boss, gaslight. It became kind of a meme, to be honest. And so we really just like to point out exactly. Yeah, teens use it all the time, but their understanding of it is not very nuanced. You are right on, Maureen. And so we try to pull out the nuance of what it actually is. And I think using the terminology of minimize, deny, blame kind of helps really ground it in what gaslighting actually is, and not this kind of misbelieving or misremembering idea that students often have for it. Awesome. All right, for the sake of time, we're going to jump on, and feel free to put any questions you have either in the chat or in the Q&A. Here's what that team power and control wheel looks like. Again, I'll have Vanessa send one out, or you can find it on Google. But we want to shift into, with our little bit of time here, to not be a Debbie Downer and to talk about healthy relationship behaviors, right? Healthy relationships are absolutely possible. They just take a different level of work, and it is work that teens can absolutely learn how to do, and they will look to those trusted adults to try and figure out what that looks like. So as we're kind of going through this list, thinking about how can I model these things when I'm working with young people, right? How can I create safe spaces where they can practice these healthy behaviors in low stakes ways, right? Trust and support, honesty and responsibility, open communication, intimacy, self-confidence and personal growth. I like to also put the word independence on there. Fairness and negotiation, shared responsibility, and respect. And all of these things, again, we point out, not just in dating relationships. These are the ways your friends should treat you. These are the things that your family should do. These are the things, right? The intimacy and some of those other pieces are going to look different depending on the relationship, but they should all be there in some way, shape, or form. And with each person, each of these is going to matter slightly differently, right? And each relationship, each of these is going to carry a different weight, right? With my friends, maybe my most important thing here is the trust and support. But maybe with my family, it is shared responsibility, right? It can look different depending on the relationship. And so kind of thinking through different relationships and understanding what that looks like for you, and inviting young people to do the same, to reflect on their relationships and which of these are hard for them. Which are the things I need to work on getting better at? Oh, I'm not very honest, or I try to hide things. Okay, maybe that's something I can work on. Or the self-confidence, right? I'm not super independent and I tend to just do whatever my friends do. Okay, how can I have my own identity? So encouraging that. And then the other piece of this is, how do we promote them, right? In the different spaces that we work with students. So a few tips. First and foremost is to set examples of open and healthy communication. Communication is where a lot of relationships will either thrive or wither and die, right? So showing how to have that effective and healthy communication, showing what that looks like. And then the same thing with boundaries. How do we talk about and set healthy boundaries with students? How do we give them that type of roadmap? And then creating safe places to practice healthy conflict resolution, especially in low stakes ways. How can we build that into and even have a roadmap of conflict resolution to use in program? I remember being a part of different teams, clubs, right? Where we had a specific set of rules of when something goes wrong or when we have a disagreement, this is how we solve it. And that taught me so much about resolving conflict and to not be scared of conflict. And a lot of that has transferred over into the relationships that I carry on into adulthood. Is, okay, I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to analyze how I'm feeling. I'm going to ask how you're feeling. We're going to find the right time to talk about these things, right? That roadmap isn't taught in a lot of spaces. So how can we model it and teach it to young people? And then finally, the biggest thing is just naming the healthy and unhealthy behaviors that you see in here. And I'm not saying that you need to call students out, although sometimes they need to be called out, but not calling out from a place of blame or a place of you did this, but instead calling out from a place of, I heard you say this and I'm a little concerned, or that sounds unhealthy to me, right? There are ways to do this, especially if you've created a safe space. So we're going to watch a video really quick. Oh wait, I forgot one thing. I didn't put it up here. Another great way is to use pop culture references to talk about relationships, because teens are 100% going to be talking about different things they're seeing in TV shows, movies, music, and celebrity relationships, right? So how can we tack onto those conversations and name those healthy and unhealthy behaviors, right? If you're talking about John Legend and Chrissy Teigen, awesome, pretty healthy relationship. If it came up a lot for a while when the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard stuff was happening. Students seemed to have a lot of opinions, but it was a great opportunity for us to talk about, oh, what is healthy and unhealthy about their relationship, and really just naming those things outright. Yeah, okay, we're gonna watch a quick video of a teacher who is just casually having lunch with some students. And I want you guys to, as we're watching this, just kind of pay attention to what is he doing that is creating a safe space? What is he saying? Just kind of how is he behaving that is helping him have these conversations with young people. Okay.
What are some red flags that people need to watch out for?
When you guys act like you guys have a big chest and it's a bird chest. He's emotionally immature.
Ooh.
He knows how to communicate.
He
doesn't let you set boundaries.
Doesn't let you set boundaries. I like that.
The video
Okay.
looks a little choppy on my end, and the audio is really choppy as well.
Oh, is it not working? Is it not working for other folks?
Can everybody hear it, see it okay?
The quality might not be good, which is fine. It's not essential.
Maybe it's just me. It's a little choppy, but okay. Okay. We'll see how it shakes out.
All right.
He doesn't like give you a piece of his food.
Red flag is when he doesn't give you a piece of his food. Have you noticed that every one of your red flags or rules have been around food?
She's just hungry.
What else? Can you come up with one that doesn't have to do with food?
Girl, so he's broke.
Oh. Well, that time it just froze on me, so I guess we won't finish that video, but that's okay. The core behind that is really just the fact that he was able to create a safe space. He's able to joke with his students, to kind of sprinkle in little pieces of, really good and valuable information while still being, relatable and joking around with them. And as we know, students are going to respond really well to that. Students are also going to respond really well anytime that we just treat them with respect and show that their lived experience matters. We might be thinking in our heads, right? Like, oh my gosh, this is such a teen love thing, or this is, I can't believe they've gotten themselves in this situation. But recognizing and allowing for that teen to let it be important to them, because it matters a lot at that age. And we have to give that the respect that it deserves. Because all the time we hear of students who are like, well, I didn't talk to so-and-so because they just brushed me off.
You know the problem?
Oops. All right. So our last little bit here, we are going to talk about what does that conflict resolution roadmap look like. So Jeremy, you want to take this one?
Yeah. These are tips that we use in presentations just to, like Ray said, give the roadmap for conflict resolution. It's okay to get angry. It happens to the best of us, and it happens to everyone at some point. It's normal to disagree and get angry, and have conflict really in any relationship in our lives. How we resolve the conflict will show you if the relationship is healthy or unhealthy. What we're going to show you now is 6 tips for communicating and resolving conflict in a healthy way. And we present these as tips, but we also let teens and young adults know that, like, they're the expert on their relationship. So these are not the be all end all of tips, but it is a suggestion for how they can navigate that. But if there's anything that feels like it's not, something that they can do, we encourage them to take what they can from it, and use it as guidance.
Yes.
So the first tip is find the right time. Find a time when everyone's calm, focused, access to an exit. It's kind of an open space. It's really good to avoid times when people are distracted or stressed. We very specifically point out that driving while you're in an argument can be very dangerous. It is not unheard of for somebody who is using unhealthy behaviors to speed up the car to get you to do something or to stop talking, or to use the motion of the vehicle to scare you. And so we highlight that very specifically because we know that that comes into play in a lot of early relationships.
Yep.
We also say talk face to face. You know, it's okay to write your thoughts out in a letter if that's going to help you get it all out and organize your thoughts. But we really encourage young people to have that communication in person, on the phone, use FaceTime, something where you can get that body language, because there's so much more communication happening in that conversation than just the verbal portion of it. So we suggest not having an argument over text, DMs, emails, written communication, just because you lose a lot of that nuance, and prioritize talking to the person in person on the phone, and find a time when it works for the both of you. Number 3 seems kind of simple, but sometimes is very hard in practice, but do not attack. Avoid accusations. Nobody always or never does anything. Instead, use statements like, I feel blank when, or talking about your feelings and your positionality in that conflict. And remember that the goal is to reach a compromise, is to achieve understanding. It's not about winning or losing. And when we put those kind of stakes on it, that's when we get into the I want to be right and you're wrong, instead of let's come together and you know, have a mutual understanding.
Yep. All right. And then tip number 4 is to be honest, telling the truth, owning up to your mistakes, and being honest about the underlying issue, not just the behaviors on the surface. Number 5 is to check body language. This one's super important, not only to check your own body language to make sure that you're showing that you're listening and not rolling your eyes or clicking your teeth or whatever else you might be doing, but checking the other person's body language to make sure that they aren't feeling overwhelmed either. And then use the 48-hour rule. The 48-hour rule is, it's not a rule, but it's a really helpful suggestion that if you're still upset about something after 2 days, then it is absolutely worth talking about. So not hiding your feelings or convincing yourself that you are overreacting, but actually naming those feelings and saying, this upset me. And even if you don't understand why, this is something we tell students all the time. You might say, I don't know why this upset me, but it did. Can we talk about it? Right? And it's so much more helpful to air that out early on, because those 2 days turns into 2 weeks, turns into 2 months, and suddenly you're mad at your partner for something that they don't even remember doing, right? So use that 48-hour rule. And finally, we have a chance for y'all to put down any questions or comments. So I invite you to throw some things in the chat if you have any questions or comments for us. And I will put in the chat our feedback survey. Let me actually, well, okay, thank you. So Journal will put in the chat our feedback, the link to our feedback survey. We would just really appreciate any feedback as we continue to do shifting kind of, we normally do this in front of students. We have a lot of feedback on that, but looking at how is our presentation to practitioners and teachers and counselors and folks who work with young people. And then finally, we have resources. So some resources, the biggest one, of course, being us. We have our 24-hour hotline for folks who are in need of immediate assistance. We do have our website, which is just the YWCA piercecounty.org. And then we have contact information. We do these types of presentations for teams. We do it for staff trainings. This is literally my whole job is doing these kinds of trainings. So if you are like, wow, I really want more people to hear this, or I have a group of teens who could benefit from this, I really encourage you to reach out to me either via phone or via email. And we can get you on our list for an upcoming presentation. And we're really open to doing different types of curriculum as well. This is not the only, it's not the only way that we or that's not the only piece of curriculum that we have. We have other things where we talk about digital dating abuse. We have specific ones where we talk about sex and consent. So a lot of those different pieces. We have some community places listed there: Rebuilding Hope, Oasis, and Whiskative, some national hotlines that we have. And then as far as websites, these are some that I've found really helpful as a person who works with young people. Love is Respect is a great resource for teens as far as a 24/7 call, chat, or text, and just general information about dating violence. Join One Love is awesome, awesome, awesome if you're looking at bringing some of this curriculum to the teens that you work with. They have trainings, lesson plans, and really high quality videos that they've put together as education tools. And then finally, scarletine.com, which is an inclusive sex ed blog and message board and chat service. Scarletine has been really awesome, and I always recommend it for folks who maybe don't feel like they can give the full curriculum they want to, but they want students to have access to reliable and factual sex education and sexual health information. So those are our different resources. And yeah, if there are any questions or comments, otherwise that puts us right at our time, and I will pass it back over to Vanessa.
Thank you so much, Ray and Sojourner. This was awesome, incredible. I think it's such important work to be done in the community with adults, and young people alike. So definitely want to provide your information. They are featured on the resource page on our website. You can find them. You could check in with me. I'm happy to link folks to the YWCA trainings that they're doing, but definitely think the more information we could get out with adults and young people, the better. So excited and grateful to have you as part of our Kids Mental Health Pierce County community. This is recorded, so it will be on the website, and so you can share it out, and we will share out the resources as well that Ray shares with me from the training. So thank you all, Kids Mental Health Pierce County. Thank you, Ray and Sojourner, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Take care.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop recording.